Good evening. Hello, some dude. I'm in it. Fixing the mic. Good evening. So I spent all day playing music today. So a long gig all morning to the afternoon. So I was in a musical frame of mind. So there we go. Yes, I not only dabble in Linux, I also play piano. Just like John McAfee plays piano. Nice piece on the piano. Thank you. Thank you. I guess I don't call what I play as pieces because it's improvised. Someone should make a compilation. No, you don't need that. I have gigs though. I mean, I broadcast it on Periscope. So if you want to, watch an actual gig, I have those. Nobody watches them, so it's kind of pointless. Okay, so welcome to Buster Brown, Twist, Min, and Tiremeyer. I'm in it. Some dude, Eagle Swords, Rubberado is back. Oh my gosh, Eagle Swords, Twist, Mint, and Tiremeyer, and AMG, and Fear Lutzi is there too, hiding. Okay, so welcome to the early people on, and I guess there's more. So as you come into to YouTube, just say hi, and I will say hi back. And then on Periscope, hold on, my Periscope isn't up now. Hold on a second here. Let me just launch it. And we got who do I have here tonight? So I see some of the same people. Mama Goo. There's Mama Goo. And let's see. And a lot of new people here on that are not on my following list. And there's that's Roberto. Okay, guys. So working from work. Hello, Jerigs. Should I go to YouTube? Yes, I would appreciate that if you watch on YouTube. Yes. So we convince the algorithm that things are well. We need to convince the algorithm that you should that the algorithm should support me. As you know, in YouTube, it's not you that decide if somebody becomes popular. No. It doesn't work like that. On YouTube, the algorithm decides. So you have to convince, the algorithm has to be convinced that you're convinced that this guy is fun to watch, and then they'll start recommending me to other people. Otherwise, they don't do it. Twitcher Mix 01. Hello, Twitcher Mix 01. So that's the way it goes. That's why if you watch on YouTube, then we make the algorithm be friendlier to me. And on Periscope, the algorithm of Periscope doesn't like me anymore. Shocking guy. So yes, so the Periscope algorithm says we don't like this guy because he doesn't do call-ins. So ever since they did the call-ins, I've disappeared because I don't do call-ins because it doesn't work for this multicast. So because I don't do call-ins, and they said, well, we don't want to support you because we want to expand the call-in feature of Periscope. So I don't really need to care about that. It is what it is, and I'm more concerned about what happens on YouTube. Okay, so is Skelp here tonight? I'm sure he will be later on, but he's not here right now. So tonight's topic is about Linux. So by the way, so again, more advertising. So I got these products in here. This is the security camera in finished form. This is the security camera, and you mount this outside, and there's a sensor and there's a lens. There's just a missing glass piece that goes on the front, but other than that, it's live, and so this camera is HD. Wide angle. It has a field of view of 170 degrees, with true motion detection, built-in flash storage, so it actually stores all the videos right in here. And well, it has to be. It's a full computer inside. We Fu can. So you want a tiny one? Well, this actually has a full computer. So it's got, it's full of parts. So there we go. That's the camera, and this is going to be available in October. And this is a little bit harder to manufacture time-wise. And this is the alarm system that both of these are part of the Brax Secure Net family. And the alarm is so simple. You will see it as we use it as I'm here all night. The green light will turn off when I'm not moving. There, see? And then if I move, it detects. That's the motion detect, and it's built with radar. So, radar based. Okay? Your smoke detector still needs its battery changed. Okay, so actually no, my smoke detectors don't have battery changing anything. When the battery dies, you throw it away and get a new smoke detector. That's the new way now. So that's what I have. So, which I don't like. I don't like that. I like to be able to replace the battery, but they don't do that anymore. Anyway, these two products are available, plus my Brax Wi-Fi, which I forgot to bring out here. The Brax Wi-Fi has built-in MAC address obfuscation at the router level, which will prevent Facebook from capturing your location from MAC addresses. So that is now available also on the latest version of the Brax Wi-Fi router with the yellow cover. Yes. So unfortunately, I forgot to bring that out. I was in such a rush. But you know what that looks like. I'm going to make videos of this next week. Does your smoke detector have a MAC address? I don't have a smoke detector. So all of these devices have obfuscated MAC addresses. So if somebody does a scan of your house, they can't tell. They can't tell if you're if you. They can see the camera, but they can't tell from the network what kind of camera it is. Okay, so that's part of the security. Because if you have a Ring camera, I'm gonna tell you right now that I can not only spot the Ring camera from far away, it will show up on my Kali Linux. It will show up the Ring camera, and then I can block it. Any hacker can block your Ring camera. This is so easy to do. So go get those rings. So I'll block them for you. And if you don't believe that, I'll demonstrate it for you. So I may have to buy a ring so that I don't disrupt some neighbor. But yes, if you love your Ring, I will go hack your Ring, and then you'll say, "Ooh, how come that did show up on Ring?" Yes, I can disable your zucking camera and show you that you shouldn't buy any zucking ring connected to Amazon, so that all of your videos and camera pictures, together with your voice, is going to Amazon. Zucked up. Now, couldn't figure out what that means, Twitcher Mix, so it got censored. Don't laugh. Smoke detectors probably have a MAC address one day. Some dude. Wouldn't surprise me, yes. Amazon will sell you one. A IoT smoke detector. IoT smoke detector. I'm sure that will happen. But all of these devices I just showed you, this device is running Linux. This camera is running Linux. Your Ring that I tell you not to buy is running Linux. Okay, so so I can build you a little detector that can spot all these hidden cameras at your Airbnb. So you don't even need a bug detector. You can just track the MAC addresses, and you say, "Oh, You got a ducking camera at the Airbnb, just like WeFu can. So how do you solve that? You spot them with a MAC address. So MAC address detector. That's all you need. So you can spot people. You can Nest smoke detectors have IP. So they're doing it already. Hey, yo, George. Okay. Tux is in the box. What does that mean? So anyway, so we're talking about Linux tonight, and a lot of things that you don't know about Linux. For example, there's a version of Linux in your car. Your car is running a version of Linux. Please invite and share on Twitter and all platforms. Thank you, Great Gold. So there's a version of Linux on your car. So Linux has kind of invaded us in so many ways, and a lot of people don't actually realize this. Your refrigerator, your smart refrigerator, your smart TV, your carrier baseband on your phone. So your phone, let me just explain this on your phone. So your phone, as I explained for so many broadcasts now, has a carrier baseband chip. The baseband has flash memory, and it's actually its own computer. It's running its own thing in there with a carrier baseband, and it has a it's its own processor. It has its own programming language, which they have now hacked. This is a thing that they can now hack your SIM card. They don't have a fix for this yet, so they can hack your SIM card today. They send you a text and hack your SIM card. They hack into the carrier baseband. Exactly what I've been talking about. They have advertised this in the last few days that they can hack your carrier baseband. Okay. They can hack your carrier baseband. And then once they hack your carrier baseband, then they can take over and issue commands. And why is it that you can do that? Why is it that you can hack your carrier baseband? The baseband is the part of the motherboard on your phone that talks to your cell carrier. Why do you think that happens? Because that baseband is running its own program, and it's running Linux. How amazing is that? You got an iPhone. The iPhone has a baseband from Qualcomm. The baseband is running Linux. It's amazing. Just about all the embedded things today, nobody actually uses Windows embedded. Just about everything embedded nowadays is running some version of Linux, and that includes your car. That includes every IoT device. 99% of them are running Linux. The devices you get from China, they're running Linux. These security devices are running Raspberry Pis, running Linux on them. Okay, so Linux is a big part of your life, and you're saying, "Well, I don't know what this Linux thing is. I don't want to use that." So I'm going to talk. No, you cannot fortify your baseband. You can unplug your baseband if you have a Librem 5, and apparently the new Pine phone for $149. You can buy those. Presumably in December, and then you can, in theory, switch it off. Hello, John 4. So anyway, the discussion tonight is just to introduce you to this operating system that apparently is in use in such a broad way, and many of you don't actually know it, and you use your Mac and you use your Windows, and you actually don't know about the use of Linux. So I'm going to actually open your eyes a little bit for those of you who have no background in this, because I have a mix of people. Some are experts in Linux and some don't know anything. Dude, come on. It's too late. Linux is too late. Buddy. Huge D-Byte is my buddy. Huge D-Byte is a friend. He's kind of a troublemaker, but he's a friend. He's a good guy. So maybe someday he'll be chased around like John McAfee. John McAfee being chased all around the world. So you're going to be chased around too, Huge D-Byte? Anyway, did you get your Linux phone yet? Oh, I'm not going to get my phone for a long time. I can tell you that. I can tell you that. But I'm programming for the phone. I told you yesterday I wrote some Linux programs to run on the Librem 5. I already wrote one. I wrote the Catch Man in the Middle, which I wrote for Android, and I actually, you know, in a few hours, wrote it for GNOME. GNOME is the desktop, the GUI for Linux, which is going to be used also on the Librem 5. So I installed that, and then I ran this. I created this program, a GUI program, and it runs. Hello, Van. Van has like been missing. So trying to gulp all these. Too late. Too late. Always too late for UT Byte. Okay, so what was I talking about? Got interrupted, and I kind of forgot where I was. So I was talking about I wrote a Linux program for the Librem 5. So I was successfully able to do that, and using the GNOME desktop. So I'm gonna be able to do that, and which means I can write any kind of programs. And was just I don't, even if I'm not gonna get the phone, I wanted to see if I can actually do desktop graphical user interface stuff in Linux, because I've actually never done that. Let me just tell you a little bit of my. Let me just tell you. We'll ask that question again later, John. Let me just tell you a little bit of my background in Linux, which in essence may be less than some of the other people in here. So there may be people here who are more extensive users of Linux. I'm going to tell you my background, at least with computers in general. So I started out with the DOS. So I started with DOS, and Windows 3.1, Windows 95, Windows NT. Microsoft had me go to their office to teach me about Windows NT. We were one of the first few people to see Windows NT way back in the day, and so I was using Windows, especially for the enterprise, for a very, very long time. So I've been using enterprise systems using Windows Server. So we would run these databases using Microsoft SQL Server, and have thousands of stations connecting to the database, all running on Windows servers and Microsoft SQL Server, and so on. So that was the stuff that I did for a very, very long time, and I dabbled a little bit in Unix. This was way back when. So I dabbled a little bit in Unix, but I didn't really work with Unix back in the day. I was working mostly with mainframes, and after I did mainframes, I started work with microcomputers. So I was doing mostly networks. So I did not HP Unix. Come on, Weefucan, you're like you're a little bit out of date here. So yeah, back in the day was a typical Linux thing that you would put. A Unix thing that you would put on your computer was SCO Unix. SCO Unix, Santa Cruz Operations Unix, and that was the kind of Unix you would put into. No, you did. You just didn't. No, I have not used Swift, and I don't. I probably will eventually have to use Swift, but I don't right now. So anyway, back in the day, it was really Windows, and of course Apple wrote its own operating system, so it was Windows and a little bit of Apple, but the bulk of it was really just Microsoft DOS, and then somebody already had the Unix system. So the Unix system has been around, for a very, very long time, and a lot of the big hospitals, I work with medical systems. A lot of the big hospitals and big facilities, including government, were using Unix. So Unix was the big deal. Wang made microcomputers. The big Unix things of the day were DEC. A lot of DEC machines. So the big hospitals would use DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation. So Wangs were into mini computers. Sorry, mini computers with Wang. Yeah. So anyway, somebody decided in the 90s. I guess Linus Torvalds decided he was gonna write something else that was not based on Windows, and he decided to kind of copy Unix, but not use Unix. He actually wrote his own code and called it Linux, even though he pronounces it. So he pronounces his name Linus, and then I guess so he calls it Linux. So Linux is the name of the kernel, the computer kernel that runs and boots your computer if you're running this thing called Linux. But Linux itself is if you've never really worked with Linux before, you're gonna get really confused because Linux is really complicated because there's so many versions of it and you don't really know what's going on and what is all this Debian and Ubuntu and Fedora and Arch Linux and Red Hat and on and on and on. It's nonstop. Pure OS now and Pop OS and all these new ones that keep popping up. And it's just so much, and people don't actually understand what it is. And if this is something that you should use, so I'm going to give you a little bit of where I've used Linux, and my experience is kind of limited because I've worked only with certain kinds of Linux machines, and on purpose. I don't. Each one of them has kind of different installation and different procedures, and different way of updating software and so on. And it's hard to relearn things over and over again. So I have not done that. So what I do is I actually just stick to a few versions of Linux that I work with. The ones that I commonly work with is Debian. So Debian is the one I commonly work with. Debian is actually a basis for many of the other ones that I use. For example, Debian is been forked to make Ubuntu. So the Ubuntu that you hear about a lot when you talk about Linux, the Ubuntu operating system is probably the most popular. So the Ubuntu, in Linux, these are called distributions or distros. So when you hear the word distro, it's like saying, well, who's packaged the Linux kernel with other stuff? And the actual official term is called GNU Linux. GNU Linux. So GNU Linux, this guy, his name is Richard Stallman, created this, basically a free version of Linux because he believes in open source software, and he called it GNU. And GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. It's kind of weird. GNU Not Unix, GNU. It's like the acronym is in the explanation of the acronym. So GNU Linux. So when you say a distribution, you're actually referring to the GNU portion, which is the packaging of the operating system, and the kernel, which was made by Linus Torvalds. So the whole thing is actually, officially, you're not supposed to just say Linux. Officially, some people will get mad at me and say, yeah, you shouldn't refer to this as Linux because it really is GNU Linux. GNU Linux, that's really what it's supposed to be. And then what distribution do you use of GNU Linux? And in my case, the base one that I use is called Debian. Okay, Debian is the basis for, as I said, the basis for Ubuntu. It's called a fork, meaning the programs from Debian, uh, they modify slightly, and then they turn that and they package it and put drivers on it, and they sell they distribute it as Ubuntu. Ubuntu is probably the most popular desktop uh, for Linux for consumers out there. But there are other things that are based on Debian that I use a lot. I'll give you some examples. Kali Linux. Kali Linux, which is the hackers version of Linux. Hackers use Kali Linux, is a packaged version of Debian with all of the hacking tools on there. So Kali Linux, every hacker uses Kali Linux. Librem, Purism made a OS that they put on the Librem computers that they're also going to be putting on the Librem 5 phone, and it's called Pure OS. System 76, which makes those laptops with hardware switches, competing with Librem with Purism, that makes the Librem laptops. They also have a Ubuntu variation they call Pop OS, and it's actually Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is the most popular one, and for hackers and people in security, you may also be aware of something called Qubes, Qubes, which is a very secure system. And then the other one that it's another variation of all this because it includes a virtual machine. It's called Hunix. So anyway, all these little advanced things you don't need to worry about, because the main one to really understand is there's Debian, which is the main source and the most popular distribution that an average person is going to use for a desktop is Ubuntu. Now, why do you need to care about this? For those of us who make these devices, this has no Ubuntu on it. I don't need that. Ubuntu is great for people who need a desktop. So if you want a desktop, looking like Windows or a Mac, then you need Ubuntu. But for me, I have servers. My servers don't have any graphical user interface. They're all command line, and those are using just plain old Debian. So my servers are Debian servers, and so they're kind of raw in that sense, and that's my apps are running on Debian. Brax.me runs on Debian Linux server, so I use that extensively. I personally do not do a lot of work with Linux as a client station, as a workstation. Until recently, I haven't really done much of that. This is the way I typically work. I have either Windows or a Mac, and on Windows I have a command line of Linux. It's called the Linux subsystem, so I can do Linux on a command line on Windows, and typically that's all I need to do is do command line on Linux because I'm controlling servers. So I'm kind of, if you look at Mr. Robot, he's always on Linux, typing a bunch of command line stuff. That's typically what I do, kind of like Mr. Robot. If you're on a Mac, it also has a command line on there, and basically, it's kind of compatible with Linux. It's a variation of Linux. OS X is a variation of Linux, so it kind of looks like it. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but Android is Linux. Who knew that? Type 1 if you knew that Android was Linux. Type 2 if you just discovered that. You didn't know that. If you didn't know it, type 2 if you say, "Oh, I didn't know that Android was Linux." 6 Billy knew, John 4 knew, Lap knew, doesn't know. Kelp is lost. Eagle Source knows. Mario knows it's Linux, and Colron knows that. Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Dom. Wow, is that a euro? I've never seen anyone do a super chat with euros. Thank you, Dom. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, so K. Lewis says 2 that didn't know. Hi, Dom. Thank you so much, Dom. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then Icky in Arizona says two. Okay, so now, so if you're hey, it's not lost, it's special. If you're special K, yes. If you're uh, wondering where the connection is between Android and Linux, and if Android is Linux, what's different with Librem 5 being Linux? Because I keep talking about the Librem 5 being a Linux phone, and then well, if the Android is a Linux phone, then what's the difference? It's the same thing. So therefore, if somebody makes some new Android version, it must be the same thing. Must be the same thing. So we don't really need to distinguish between Linux and Android because they all came from Linux. So let me explain what Google did to Android and makes it a little bit different than your standard Linux. So Android is a fork. They took Linux and basically put a layer on the Linux operating system that works with Android. And this is what Android did, and you may not understand here. And again, Mac OS X is also another variation of that. They took Linux or Unix, I don't know which, and they modified that. And so again, Linux and OS X are related. They have the same commands even. So if you want to know what the command lines are for Linux and you're using a Mac, guess what? They're mostly the same, which shows you the same roots. So the OS X came from Linux base, probably. I didn't actually verify. It could have been Unix based, but I think it's Linux based. They have a place to get Unix. The Unix open source version is called FreeBSD. So there's actually a Unix thing that's free open source, and it's called FreeBSD. So OS X could have come from FreeBSD or come from Linux. Linux is completely different. It's called a fork. When you take original code, open source, and then you make your own version of it, because it's open source, you can do that. That's called a fork. It's a fork in the road, and you split. So Chrome OS, another thing that you may not know about, this little secret that you don't know about that's actually interesting. Chrome OS is also Linux. Chrome OS is also Linux. So not only did Google say we're going to modify Linux and create Android, they said we're going to modify Linux and create Chrome OS. So Chrome OS on the Chromebook is actually also Linux and then plastered with Chrome on there on the BIOS, so you can't play with it. So what exactly is different with Chrome OS and Android, and how did Google pretty much take over the Linux world? Can you imagine that Linux was not successful by itself, commercially at least, compared to Windows and OS X? Yet Android, which is based on Linux, is extremely successful. Android is the most successful phone. 85% of the phones run Android, which means 85% of the phones are based on Linux. It's very funny if you think about that. 85% of the phones are based on Linux. Kai OS, which is not based on Android, it's a separate OS, is based on Linux. I mean, educational stuff that I'm telling you here. And once you understand, now this is part of the information, because if you understand what I'm talking about, you also understand some of the security problems that are involved with some of these operating systems, even though the basis of it is the same, which is Linux. So when I say I'm going to use Linux, don't be so shocked and don't be so like, I don't know anything about Linux, I'm not going to go use that. Well, those of you who have my Brax Wi-Fi router, you're running Linux. Those of you who buy this alarm system, you're running Linux. Those of you who have a Raspberry Pi for any purpose is running Linux. Okay, and those of you with an Android is running Linux. Okay, so now, going back to the difference, what is different with a Android or Chrome OS? What is different with that in Linux. Salvatore, how are you doing, my friend? So the difference, guys, is that they put a little bit of a, the drivers, the device drivers, which in Windows you put a new device, and in modern day, Windows runs very well because all the makers make these plug and play devices, and so you never think about it. And that's what Android said. This is what no Android did something different. What Google did. Hello, Nabil. This is what Google did. Google said, this is what Google said. We're gonna define the hardware that you can use with an Android. We're gonna define the baseband, the Wi-Fi, what kind of device. We're gonna define what chip you're all gonna use, Qualcomm or whatever. They're gonna define all of the hardware in the Android core driver set. Okay, so what Google did to solve the problem of different devices and incompatibilities because of different hardware, which is kind of a unique approach because although it's similar to what Apple did, is so Google dictated what hardware you use on the phone. So guys, this is what is different with Android. All of the phones on Android use the same sucking hardware. If you're running an Android, all of the internal chips are made to be spec'd out to be compatible with whatever Google says. So you can't vary it. So, you can't vary it. That's why this idea of can I put a hardware switch on an Android? No, because the chips and everything are actually already predefined. So that's why Android phones can be so cheap, because the actual board with all of the chips on there, and it's already compatible automatically with Android, are already built in. So you just buy the motherboard from Qualcomm or whoever sells it, and they're already configured for Android, and all you do is package it and put a nice screen on it and put buttons and fingerprint and spying Face ID and whatever, and you're set. So no one has to reinvent the wheel with the hardware. They just change the CPU, make it go faster, add memory, put more cameras, but the base operating system and what hardware it works with is defined in Android itself. So Android has defined the hardware. This is why all Android phones are so easy to make. If you're going to be a manufacturer and you want to make an Android, it's simple because all the hardware is predefined, and since everyone uses the same hardware, you can go to China. All phones are made in China. All phones are made in China. Sorry, Trump. Your zucking phone, Trump, is made in China. All phones are made in China. Okay? So if you put a tariff on your phone, then every one of us will pay more, including you, Trump, because there's no way around it. All of your phones are made in China. It's a shocking fact. It's kind of shocking. In fact, it's only made in one region of China. I think Shenzhen. That's where all the phones are made. So China number one for phone manufacturing. What about iPhones in India? All phones are made in China. Of course, they want to move it. iPhones are made by Foxconn. Now, Foxconn has put factories now in Thailand and Vietnam and whatever, so they could say, well, it's not made in China. But Foxconn is a Chinese company. Foxconn is a Chinese company. So it's all China. So unfortunately, that's the way the world is. And much as I don't like, if there's a war between China and the U.S., we won't have phones. Darn! No more spying. No more spying phones. Suck. Librem phones are made in China. They were made in China. They're assembling them now. But they were made in China in the same place, Shenzhen. Okay, that's the only place you can get phones now. Foxconn can build factories, and so they may take parts from China, move them to Vietnam, and then ship and say made in Vietnam or made in Thailand or made in Malaysia, and then ship it to the U.S. and they're all made from a Chinese company. Okay, so Foxconn is still a Chinese company. Whatever they outsource it to, it doesn't make any difference. The companies are from Foxconn, and the chips are made in China, but all the patents for those chips are made by Qualcomm and MediaTek. Just two companies. Those chips are made by Qualcomm and MediaTek, since they hold 50% or more between the two companies of all patents related to the phone. There are thousands of patents related to the phone, controlled by 50% controlled by two companies, and the rest controlled by Apple, Google, etc., etc. Anyway, anyway, back to what we're talking about. So Android is Linux, and but Android put a specific graphical user interface. So the behavior with the way that the home screen is designed and how you launch apps and all that. That's a layer that Android put over Linux. So even though the base is Linux, there's a hardware layer they put in with software on there, and then there's a GUI, or graphical user interface, which is what Android is. So Android is the hardware layer as well as the GUI layer. Now, if you're gonna run Ubuntu, like the new version of Ubuntu, let's say you said, "Oh, Rob talked about Ubuntu. I want to know what this is all about. Let me install Ubuntu." I'll tell you about installing Ubuntu. If you install on your computer on Ubuntu, you will be installing a Linux with a graphical user interface, and it's going to look like Windows or a Mac. Well, not exactly, but it'll function very much the same. It's called the GUI, graphical user interface, and the GUI on the current version of Ubuntu is called GNOME. It's spelled like gnome, but it's pronounced GNOME. So GNOME is GNOME comes from GNU. So GNU Linux. So they all became weird. They all became weird with all this. So this all. So hello, Tony. So what's up, Tony? Tony's still mad at me. So it's not running Android. So if let's say you got a Librem 5 as a Unix phone, it's not going to look like Android because the graphical user interface layer that they're going to put on it is made by some people, and the one that the free one that we use on Linux, and the one that seems to be used by Ubuntu now, so that's going to increase its popularity, is GNOME. And I actually made a GNOME compatible app for Linux a couple days ago, and I built that over GNOME because that's what I wanted to do. There are other graphical user interfaces on Linux, but GNOME is probably best on a standard computer, and there's some other ones that are made to work better on smaller devices like a Raspberry Pi. So you're probably not going to want to use GNOME on a Raspberry Pi. You're going to use some of these other ones called KDE. So anyway, somebody asked a question on Periscope. How do I learn how to be invisible on the internet? You watch my videos on YouTube. That's how. You have a lot of work to do. Go watch all of my videos. All of them. Short ones. They're 5 to 10 minutes. Watch them all, and then hopefully you'll figure it out. some dude is gonna tell me that I'm supposed to tell you it's KFCE, KDE, GNOME, and Unity. And it's like, come on. Uh, yeah, they're not gonna know that, some dude. So let's. Unity is kind of gone. So we're dealing mostly with GNOME and then other variants. So anyway, don't try to turn my topic into something else. We can talk about that another time. But when I'm not explaining something, you can deviate from the main topic, but not right now. In any case, so the question is, I'm telling you that Linux is part of your world now. Linux is part of your world in every day. And some of you, like Great Gold told me, like, I don't know anything about Linux. I don't know if I want to do this Linux thing. I don't know anything about that. I'll learn. And here, some dude, there's LXDE on the pie. LXDE on the pie. Not GNOME. So anyway, going back to what I was saying about the influence of Linux on your on your day to day, and none of you are actually thinking about considering using Linux for the desktop. And Salvatore brings out a good point there. If you're like used to Windows, what would be a good Linux distribution for you to use on Windows? Should you use Ubuntu or something else? And I'm going to tell you my actual experience here with all of this. Okay, no, use GNOME, not XFCE or LXDE or whatever, or KDE. For this population, if you're making small devices, there's reasons to use other kinds of GUIs, which has to do with the kind of space it uses. But let's keep it simple for the average person. Most of you are going to load Ubuntu. And if you're going to load Ubuntu, you will see GNOME. So you might as well understand that's what you're going to see is GNOME. Okay, now, so given that you have a experience with PCs and Macs, you might want to ask, what kind of Linux can I run on this? And before I even do that, you may want to ask another question. Could you run Linux inside Mac OS X or Windows? And I actually do that all the time. I run a full version of Ubuntu on my PC. I run a full version of Pure OS, a full version of whatever I want to run on a PC, and I can do the same I was running Unix on a Mac. And you do that using virtual machines. So you can actually host another operating system inside your operating system, and that's good for testing. So if you want to test stuff and you say, what does it look like? I don't want to really install it on my computer, but I want to know what it looks like. So you can install something called a virtual machine, and there's a free virtual machine manager that you can use on computers nowadays from Oracle. It's called VirtualBox. So if you install VirtualBox on your Windows, on your Mac, on your Linux, then you can actually run little other operating systems which run inside a virtual machine. So I use VirtualBox. VirtualBox is slower, but it's good for testing. The only problem with doing for the kind of level that I'm at, the only problem with using a virtual machine is you don't really have access to the camera, the Wi-Fi, the network directly. So you don't really know what the real issues are. So it's great for testing and doing certain specialized things, but that's not the way I would necessarily recommend you run Linux, other than to learn it. If you want to learn how to use Linux, that's the way to do it. That's not the way I do it. I actually found, and this is from real experience. I have some old computers here. I have a lot of old computers. So I found a Lenovo T430. Lenovo T430, which is kind of a big computer. It's a big one, and it's made for the enterprise. So these are, leftover from enterprise days, and a lot of corporate users use Lenovo T430s. I'm gonna guess in 2013. So these are 6-year-old computers at least. Okay, they're 6 years old. They're running fourth generation Intel processors. Fourth generation Intel processors, and they come equipped with everything. They have uh, built-in SD card readers, USB 3, USB 2, DVD player, DVD player writer, Thunderbolt, uh, an actual physical Ethernet plug, and comes with AC 802.11 Wi-Fi AC. I mean, it's got all the goodies from. You would think that this would not be available in 2013, but these were probably a couple of $1,000 computers in 2013, and I bought these used for, I think, $200. So I bought these computers for $200, and then they're running. Originally, they were running Windows 10, and I'm gonna tell you, I installed Linux on them. I installed Ubuntu on these machines, and they're again 6 years old. They run really fast. 6-year-old computers, because that's one of the things about Linux. Linux does not use the same kind of resources as Windows or Mac OS X. They're a lot faster. The kernel is very small, and it doesn't really use a lot of resources like in the Windows system. Windows loads all this bloatware on it. There's so much stuff going on that's just much of it is unnecessary, and they're made for corporate users. They basically put everything in the kitchen, including the kitchen sink. They are SSD, John. Yes, SSD, and that came with a Windows license, which I erased. So these devices, $200. I mean, a full-featured computer. The displays are, not the most current displays, but they're bright enough. You can hack someone's internet using Linux. Nabil, come on, that's like a baby kind of comment. Sorry, Nabil. You can hack anyone with Windows. You don't need Linux, but yes, most hackers use Kali Linux. For security reasons, I'm really going to change my value, so the next time I do hand gesture, I go to jail. Whatever. Okay. So anyway, what is SIG drive, Simon? So anyway, I found that if you have some old computers, and this is the way you experiment with Linux, you said, I have some old computers that are 5 years, 7 years old, and can you actually use Linux on them? You may not be able to tolerate a computer that's 7 years old, because the display may not be as bright as the new ones. But if you load Linux on them, they're actually going to be quite usable, and you can load Ubuntu Linux on it. And this is what I found in real experience. In real experience, your computer's 2009. That's that's getting up there. I want it to sound sophisticated. Nabil. That's funny, Nabil. That's funny. Well, you're not a techie, Nabil. You're going to medical school. You're not a techie. So, anyway. So, um, but back to what I'm talking about with um, with loading Ubuntu on this old computer. It was actually quite nice, and I really enjoyed it. Now, some of you are probably like resistant to anything that looks very different. You're used to Windows 7 or prior XP, and you want to get the start bar on the bottom, and you want the menus to look like Windows, and holistic Deb, my friend. So if you want to, if you want to load something that looks kind of more like Windows but is running Linux, you can do that. And you know what? You know what you use? You know what you use to make it look like Linux? You use Zorin, Zorin. Now, Zorin is based on Ubuntu, but they changed the menus and all the graphics a little bit to make it look like Windows. So if you're one of those people that says, "Oh, I want to," I'm a Windows fanboy. It's got to look exactly like Windows. You can use Zorin. Now, for the rest of you, I'd say it's a waste of time. I don't really care that it looks like Windows. Just like I don't care that it looks like a Mac. They're all the same to me. There's a menu. You click on it. There's settings. It's all the same stuff. Zorin. So if you want to make it look like Windows, you use Zorin. Now, how are you doing, Holistic Deb, my good friend? You haven't been back in a while, but you're so popular now. You're so popular on Periscope. We are just a little people. So, Ubuntu is good enough. Yeah. So the problem that you will find when you run, miss you, my friend. You haven't even talked to me in Brax. How are you? You're like so popular. I looked at your numbers and like, wow. I've disappeared from Periscope and Holistic Deb is taking off. So I'm glad, so glad. Wishing you all the success, my good friend. Hell, so anyway, back to what I was saying. Now I forgot. Oh yeah. So I was talking about what kind of version of Linux you should put on your computer. One of the things you'll find, because somebody asked me yesterday, have you tried Pure OS? Because Pure OS is loaded on Librem desktops. And somebody asked me yesterday if I use something called Pop OS. So if you didn't know, Pure OS is based on Debian. So it's the same thing, Debian. Pure OS is based on Ubuntu. Sorry, Pop OS is based on Ubuntu. Okay? Go to DistroWatch. You're not going to understand what's in DistroWatch. So if you look at all these different variations, should you care and should you use them? Now I'm going to tell you, I tried installing Pure OS. I've not used Pure OS before. I installed Pure OS on this older Lenovo, and guess what? Wouldn't run the Wi-Fi. No matter what I do, I even wasted money and got 2 new Wi-Fi cards, and it did not work. It did not work with the Wi-Fi. So that's the main problem with all of these OSs that vary. So if you're going to use Pure OS, chances are it will work very nicely with a Librem laptop. If you get a Pop OS, I am certain it will work very nicely with your System 76 laptop, but it will not work with your Lenovo laptop. It's going to be very difficult, and it's very frustrating until you find out that there is one company that has put a lot of the drivers for that work very well with Windows and surprisingly works out of the box, and I didn't have to buy anything because it worked very nicely, and that was Ubuntu. So Ubuntu from Canonical. Canonical is a very big company. I think their revenue is like $250 million. So they're making a revenue of 250 million. So they're a good sized company. They have like 1,000 employees, all working on Linux and working on drivers and so on. You can run Steam on Linux, Andy. You can run Steam. So 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 in essence, when you use Ubuntu, you are leveraging the many people who can package all these drivers, which is such a pain on sucking Windows. I mean, sucking distributions of Linux that are not popular. So I should before I started shouting and screaming that Pure OS wouldn't load my Wi-Fi, I should have just loaded Ubuntu first because it loaded out of the box, running perfectly the first time. And the fuck is Team Zuck? The Zuck. Andy needs to learn a little bit more about gaming. Any gamers in here? Any gamers in here? Do you not know what Steam is? So if there are any gamers in here, you don't know what Steam is, then talk to some kids. Okay, it's kind of hanging here. Hold on. I just noticed the problem here. Okay, just waiting for it to recover. It's going up and down the network. Netflix users. Very unsteady network. Very unsteady network. Hold on a second here. Just waiting for it to recover. It doesn't look like it's going to fail completely. There we go. Okay. Okay, it's wow. Disruptive. Yes. I thought this was going to disconnect. So, yeah, it's let me just keep an eye on it before I start talking and then it disconnects. Okay, it looks like it's stabilized now. So the network was slowed down there for a moment. But it didn't disconnect completely, but it was just dragging. It was like really way low here. Okay, so it looks like it's back. Okay, looks like it's back. So anyway, yeah. So Steam is can be used for gaming. How long has this been doing this? Which one? The network issue? Yeah, I'm using I don't know. It's my ISP. I'm using a wired connection now. I'm not on wireless anymore. The wireless was a problem. You know, dinner time, people using microwaves. So I'm not using wireless. I am wired. So that's why I shouldn't be having these issues. So you didn't get any ads, Jay, because often my videos are because of all these people who say all the bad words in here. So it gets demonetized, and then they have to go check on it the next day, and the next day they release the demonetization. So so that's why you don't see ads. Still down. Hold on, I'm just waiting for the network to recover here. It's so unstable right now. Very, very unstable. Okay, looks like it's recovering now. Hold on. It's very disruptive. Oh my gosh. Okay, but it didn't kill the broadcast. Didn't kill the broadcast. Okay, just waiting. Before I start saying anything important, I want to make sure that's actually steady. So sorry about that. ISP side. Hold on.